The little girl was a ghost of tattered pink silk wandering through a graveyard of rusted iron. Vera watched from the cracked window of her bus as the child stumbled over oil-slicked gravel, her bare feet stained with the soot of Seoul's industrial heart. In the girl's trembling hand was a dragon-engraved gold coin, a symbol of power that had no business being in a junkyard. Vera lived by the code of the invisible. As a homeless Afro mechanic, she had spent years blending into the shadows, fixing what the city broke and asking for nothing in return. But as the little girl, Hana, collapsed against a stack of discarded tires, her pink dress now smeared with grease and rain, the silence of the junkyard felt like a trap. Vera didn't yet know that Hana was the stolen heart of Kang Muyol's criminal empire. She didn't know that the little pearl had escaped a massacre only to wander into the path of a woman who had nothing left to lose. The rain began to hiss against the metal as Vera stepped out, her heavy boots splashing in the dark water. She didn't speak. She simply gathered the little girl in the pink silk into her arms and reached for her heaviest steel wrench. At the perimeter of the yard, the slow, predatory crawl of black sedans signaled that the hunt had arrived. The woman the world ignored was now the only thing standing between a mafia princess and the men sent to finish her. If you love stories where a silent protector takes on an entire underworld, hit that like button and subscribe. This is The Iron Flower, where the mechanic from the shadows becomes the mafia's greatest nightmare. The interior of the modified bus didn't smell like a home. It smelled like survival, a sharp mix of diesel, scorched copper, and the faint, citrus scent of the expensive soap still clinging to Hana's skin. Vera set the girl down on a cot made from the leather upholstery of a vintage Jaguar. She didn't offer a hug or a blanket. She immediately went to the dashboard, her grease-stained fingers dancing over a series of mismatched toggles and flickering vacuum tubes. "Sit, don't touch the glass," Vera narrated, her voice low and gravelly. "If you smudge it, the light refraction changes, and right now we need to look like a pile of dead metal." Hana stared at the woman. In her world of polished marble and silent bodyguards, Vera was an impossibility, a mountain of a woman with braided hair and eyes that looked like they had seen the end of the world and survived it. "I want to go home," Hana whispered, clutching the dragon-engraved gold coin so hard her knuckles turned white. "My father, Kang Muyol, he will pay you. He has all the gold." Vera paused, a dark, dry smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Kid, your father's gold is exactly why there are 4 black sedans currently scanning this sector with thermal drones. To them, you aren't a daughter. You're a bargaining chip. And right now, you're a chip that's about to get cashed in." Outside, a high-pitched whine cut through the rhythmic drumming of the rain. A drone. Vera didn't panic. She grabbed a canister of liquid nitrogen used for loosening seized bolts and a roll of heavy-duty lead foil. With the precision of a surgeon, she began lining the windows. "The drone is looking for 98.6 degrees, Vera explained, more to herself than the girl. "Human heat, but liquid nitrogen drops the floor temperature to sub-zero in seconds. To the drone, we're just a block of ice sitting in a frozen junkyard." She cracked the valve. A ghost-white mist poured over the floor, swirling around Hana's feet. The girl let out a tiny gasp of cold, but Vera's hand was firm on her shoulder, pressing her down into the shadows. On the small, flickering monitor salvaged from an old security system, Vera watched the red heat signature of the drone hover directly above the bus. It paused, searching for the little pearl of the Kang Empire. After a heart-stopping 10 seconds, the drone veered away, satisfied that the bus was nothing more than a hollowed-out carcass of iron. Vera exhaled, the tension leaving her shoulders for a split second. She looked down at the girl. "Your father might own the city, Hana, but in this junkyard I own the physics, and as long as you're in this bus, you're invisible." But as she spoke, a heavy, rhythmic thud echoed against the bus's reinforced door. It wasn't a drone. It was a human fist. "Vera," a voice boomed from the rain, cold and authoritative. "I know you're in there. Open the door, or I'll have my men tear this scrap heap apart with you inside it." Vera's eyes went cold. She didn't reach for a gun. She reached for her 24-inch pipe wrench. "Looks like the boss found us faster than I thought," she muttered. The door of the bus groaned under the weight of the rain, and the man standing behind it. Vera didn't flinch. She grabbed a heavy, oil-slicked rag and began wiping the grease from her palms, her eyes never leaving the monitor. Beside her, Hana had turned into a statue of terror, her small hand trembling as she tucked the dragon coin into the pocket of Vera's rugged jumpsuit. "If you go out there," Hana whispered, "he'll take me back to the Palace of Thorns, and the bad men, they're already inside the walls." Vera didn't answer. She kicked a hidden lever beneath the driver's seat. A hiss of hydraulics echoed through the cabin as the bus's suspension lowered by 3 inches, effectively sealing the door from the inside with a deadbolt made of hardened rebar. "I don't open my door for men who threaten my livelihood," Vera projected her voice, the tone vibrating through the metal walls. "And I don't care how many tailored suits you have waiting in the wings. This is private property." A moment of silence followed, filled only by the roar of the soul storm. Then, the voice came again, softer this time, but carrying the weight of a falling guillotine. "I am not here as a customer, Vera, and I am not here as your enemy. I am a father whose heart is currently sitting on your jaguar skin cot." Vera checked the secondary camera. Standing in the downpour was Kang Muyol. He wasn't wearing a coat. His white shirt was translucent from the rain, clinging to the scars of a dozen power struggles. He held no weapon, just a steady, desperate gaze fixed on the bus's darkened windows. Vera looked at Hana, then back at the monitor. She recognized the look on Muyol's face. It wasn't the look of a predator. It was the look of a man who had realized that all his millions couldn't buy a single minute of safety for the person he loved most. "Stay under the dashboard," Vera commanded Hana. "If I whistle, you crawl into the engine compartment through the hatch. It's lead-lined. Don't come out until you hear the engine turn over." Vera pulled the manual release. The door hissed open, and the cold, wet breath of the soul night rushed in. She stepped onto the metal grate, the 24-inch pipe wrench resting casually on her shoulder. Muyol stepped forward, but Vera raised the wrench. "One more step, and I'll demonstrate how 100 foot-pounds of torque feels against a human kneecap," she said, her voice like grinding stone. Muyol stopped. He looked at Vera, really looked at her. He saw the grease, the worn boots, and the fierce, unyielding intelligence in her eyes. In a world where everyone bowed, this woman was standing in the mud, daring a king to move. "The coin," Muyol said, his voice cracking slightly. "She has the coin I gave her. It has a GPS pulse. That's how I found you, but my rivals, the men who betrayed me, they are tracking the same signal. They are less than 3 minutes away." Vera's eyes widened. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the gold coin Hana had slipped her. She felt the faint, rhythmic vibration of a microtransmitter hidden inside the dragon's eye. "You brought a beacon into my junkyard," Vera growled. "I brought a daughter to the only woman in the city who isn't on my payroll," Muyol countered. "Protect her, Vera, hide her. In exchange, I will give you anything. This junkyard, this city, my life." Vera looked at the coin, then at the horizon where the flickering lights of a dozen motorcycles were cresting the hill. She didn't hesitate. She threw the coin into a nearby vat of used motor oil. The thick lead-based sludge would dampen the signal instantly. "I don't want your city, Muyol," Vera said, grabbing him by the collar and shoving him toward the bus. "But you're right about one thing. They're here. Get inside." The interior of the bus felt smaller with Muyol inside. He was a man built for cathedrals and glass boardrooms, and his presence turned Vera's sanctuary into a pressurized chamber. He immediately moved toward Hana, but the girl didn't run to him. She stayed tucked behind Vera's leg, her small hand gripping the grease-stained fabric of the mechanic's jumpsuit. "Hana," Muyol breathed, reaching out. "Don't," Vera snapped. Her eyes fixed on the array of monitors. "You're the reason they're here. Your love just painted a bullseye on this entire district. If you want to be a father, start by being a silent one." Muyol froze, his jaw tightening. No one had spoken to him like that in 20 years. But as he looked at Vera, he saw her hands moving with the speed of a card dealer, flipping switches that activated the junkyard's secondary systems. "They're coming through the north gate," Vera narrated. 3 bikes, light armor. They think they're hunting a little girl. They don't realize they just entered a slaughterhouse. The roar of the motorcycle engines drowned out the rain. The lead rider, a man in a sleek charcoal helmet, skidded into the center of the yard, his suppressed submachine gun raised. He pointed it at the bus, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Vera!" Muyol shouted, reaching for a hidden holster under his wet shirt. "Sit down," Vera barked. She slammed a heavy copper lever downward. Outside, a massive electromagnet, salvaged from an old industrial crane and hidden beneath a pile of scrap, shrieked to life. The motorcycle didn't just stop, it was violently yanked sideways. The metal frame of the bike and the rider's weapon were sucked toward the magnet with the force of a freight train. The rider was launched into the air, landing hard in the mud as his bike became a permanent part of a 2-ton scrap heap. The other 2 riders swerved, panic evident in their movements. They began to fire blindly into the dark. Vera didn't flinch. She grabbed a modified flare gun from the dash. "In my world," she muttered, "we don't use bullets, we use chemistry." She fired. The flare didn't hit the riders. It hit a series of strategically placed canisters filled with pressurized acetylene gas. A wall of white-blue flame erupted between the bus and the gunmen, the heat so intense it cracked the windshield of the nearest sedan. The riders shielded their eyes, their thermal goggles blinded by the sudden inferno. Muyol watched, mesmerized. He had spent billions on security technology, but he had never seen anything as effective as the raw, brutal ingenuity of the woman standing before him. She wasn't just defending her home, she was conducting an orchestra of destruction. "You're not just a mechanic," Muyol whispered, his voice filled with a new, dangerous kind of respect. Vera didn't look at him. She was already checking the pressure gauges on her nitrogen tanks. "I'm a woman who wants to be left alone, Muyol, and your 3 minutes are up. That was just the scouts. The shadows will be here next, and they don't use motorcycles." She turned to him, the flickering light of the fire reflecting in her dark eyes. "If we're going to survive the night, you're going to have to do exactly what I say. Do you understand?" For the first time in his life, the king of the Seoul underground nodded. "Lead the way, Vera." The junkyard wasn't just a pile of trash. To Vera, it was a living map. As the sirens of the syndicate's heavy response teams began to wail in the distance, she grabbed a heavy tactical backpack and shoved a handful of high-grade capacitors into the side pockets. "The bus is a decoy now," Vera narrated, her voice steady as she clipped a small transmitter to Hana's collar. "If we stay, they'll eventually bring a crane or a wrecking ball. We move through the arteries." Muyol gripped his pistol, his eyes darting to the flickering monitors. "There are no arteries, Vera. This is a dead end. We are surrounded by 20-foot steel fences." Vera didn't argue. She grabbed a remote detonator and pressed a yellow button. Behind the jaguar skin cot, a section of the bus floor hissed and slid back, revealing a jagged hole that dropped straight into a concrete tunnel. The air that rose from it smelled of damp earth and old copper. "It's an old drainage line from the 70s, Vera said, ushering Hana toward the hole. "I spent 6 months clearing the silt. It leads to the subway maintenance shafts 2 miles away. Go, now." Muyol hesitated. "You're staying." "Someone has to keep the heart beating," Vera muttered, pointing to the monitors. "If the bus goes dark, they'll know we're in the tunnels. I need to trigger the ghost." As Muyol lowered Hana into the darkness, the first shadow arrived. These weren't street thugs. They were tactical specialists in matte black armor, moving with silent, predatory precision. They didn't fire. They deployed a high-frequency sonic pulse, a wall of sound designed to liquefy the eardrums of anyone inside the bus. Vera winced as the metal walls of her home began to vibrate, a low-frequency hum that made her teeth ache. She reached for her dashboard and flipped the final, red-guarded switch. "Meet the ghost," she whispered. Suddenly, every car in the junkyard, hundreds of rusted shells, broken sedans, and hollowed-out trucks, screeched to life. Vera had rigged their old starters to a central grid. Horns blared in a chaotic, deafening discord, headlights flickered like 1,000 strobes, and several rigged car alarms began to scream at different pitches. The sonic pulse of the assassins was drowned out by the mechanical roar of the dead, coming back to life. The tactical team froze, their sensors overwhelmed by the sheer volume of electrical noise and light. Under the cover of the chaos, Vera dropped into the tunnel. She pulled the floor hatch shut and triggered a small thermite charge, welding the plate into place. She landed in the mud of the tunnel, her flashlight cutting through the gloom. Muyol was waiting, his gun aimed at the hatch. When he saw it was her, he lowered the weapon, but his eyes stayed on her face. "You destroyed your home to save us," he said, the realization hitting him harder than the cold water at his feet. "I can replace a bus, Muyol," Vera said, pushing past him to take Hana's hand. "I can't replace my conscience. Keep moving. The moisture in these walls will mask your scent from the dogs, but we only have 20 minutes before they figure out the ghost is a loop." As they hurried through the dark, Hana looked up at Vera. "Are you coming with us to the palace?" Vera didn't look back. "I'm getting you to the subway, kid. After that, you and your father are back in your world, and I'm back in mine." Muyol watched the way Vera navigated the darkness, confident, powerful, and utterly uninterested in his status. He had spent his life looking for soldiers. He hadn't realized he needed a mechanic. The drainage pipe spat them out into a forgotten maintenance sublevel of the Seoul Metro. The air here was thick with the scent of ozone and the rhythmic, metallic screech of trains passing overhead. Vera didn't slow down. She moved like a shadow, her hand firm on Hana's shoulder as Muyol followed, his expensive shoes ruined and his pride discarded somewhere back in the mud. "We take the Line 4 maintenance car," Vera narrated, her eyes scanning the dark for the telltale red flicker of syndicate cameras. "It's manual, no GPS, no digital footprint." Muyol caught her arm as they reached a rusted handcar sitting on a side rail. "My private security should have intercepted us at the junkyard. My brother, Mujin, was in charge of the extraction, if he isn't here." Vera stopped, her flashlight catching the grim set of Muyol's jaw. She pulled out a small, handheld radio she'd tuned to the syndicate's encrypted frequencies. It wasn't playing orders. It was playing a funeral march, a specific code used by the Kang family when a new king had been crowned. "The betrayal isn't outside your walls, Muyol," Vera said, her voice dropping an octave. "It's inside them. Your brother didn't miss the extraction. He's the one who sent the shadows to my yard." Hana let out a small, stifled sob, her tiny hands clutching Vera's grease-stained pocket. Muyol's face went bone-white. The Palace of Thorns, the high-tech fortress he had built to be the safest place on Earth, was now a death trap. Every guard, every camera, and every biometric lock was now controlled by the man who wanted them dead. "I have nothing left," Muyol whispered, the realization shattering his composure. "No men, no access, just a pistol with 3 rounds and a daughter who is terrified of me." Vera looked at the man, then at the little girl who was looking up at her as if she were a god. Vera sighed, the sound of a woman who knew she was about to make a very expensive mistake. "You have me," Vera said, tossing a heavy, custom-built multi-tool to Muyol. "And I have enough scrap metal in my backpack to build a backdoor into your brother's invincible fortress. But we aren't going in as royalty." Muyol looked at the tool, then at Vera's dark, determined face. "How are we going in?" "Through the service vents," Vera replied, a predatory glint in her eye. "Your brother spent billions on facial recognition and heat sensors. He forgot that the people who build the world, the cleaners, the mechanics, the ghosts, already have the keys." Vera grabbed a canister of industrial-strength acid from her pack. "We're going to the palace, but we're not going to knock. We're going to dismantle it, bolt by bolt." As the manual rail car began to roll into the pitch-black tunnel, Muyol sat beside Vera. He reached out, his hand hovering near hers. He didn't touch her, but for the first time, he wasn't looking at her as a mechanic. He was looking at her as the only anchor in a world that had turned into a storm. The Palace of Thorns loomed over Seoul like a jagged glass needle. It was a fortress of silicon and steel, guarded by a billion-dollar security grid that could detect a heartbeat from a block away. But as the trio crouched in the shadows of the loading dock, Vera wasn't looking at the front gate. She was looking at the trash compactor. "To your brother, this building is a masterpiece," Vera narrated, pulling a set of insulated wire cutters from her belt. "To me, it's just a giant machine with a very predictable digestive system." Muyol gripped his weapon, his eyes tracking the elite guards patrolling the perimeter. The vents are equipped with laser grids, Vera. Even if we get inside, the sensors will flag our biometric signatures in seconds. We won't make it to the elevator. We aren't taking the elevator, Vera replied, handing him a canister of pressurized carbon dioxide. And we aren't going to be human. If you want to survive, Muyol, you have to stop acting like a boss and start acting like a ghost. She led them to the main coolant intake. While the guards watched the monitors for threats, Vera began to work on the primary junction box. She didn't use a laptop or a hacking device. She used a simple copper wire to bridge two terminals, tricking the system into thinking there was a pressure leak. As the massive fans slowed to a halt, she ushered Hana and Muyol into the ductwork. The space was cramped, hot, and smelled of ozone. The mercy of the mechanic, Vera whispered as they crawled through the darkness. The architects always leave room for the repairman. They forget that the repairman can also be the saboteur. Suddenly, the duct vibrated. A voice boomed through the building's intercom, Mujin, the treacherous brother. Search the lower levels. If my brother is with that woman, kill them both. Bring the girl to me alive. Hana began to shake, the narrow walls of the vent closing in on her. Muyol reached out to comfort her, but his own hand was trembling with rage. Vera stopped, turning back to face him in the cramped tunnel. Control it, she commanded, her face inches from his. Your anger is a loud noise, Muyol. In here, noise is death. She reached out and placed her hand over his, not to be romantic, but to steady him. Her skin was rough, calloused, and smelled of the junkyard, but to Muyol, it felt like the only solid thing in a collapsing universe. He looked into her eyes, and for a moment, the cold Mafia Boss saw a world where power wasn't measured in blood, but in the strength to stay calm when the fire was rising. I trust you, Muyol whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the building. Don't trust me, Vera countered, pulling a small, homemade EMP device from her pack. Trust the physics. We're at the server room. Get ready to run. With a single click of the device, the lights in the hallway below them flickered and died. The palace was blind. The server room was a forest of blinking blue lights and humming cooling towers. It was the brain of the empire, and for the first time, Muyol was a stranger in his own mind. Vera sat cross-legged on the floor, her backpack open like a surgeon's kit, while Hana huddled in the shadow of a server rack, clutching a small metal bird Vera had twisted out of a copper wire for her. I can't just shut it down, Vera narrated, her hands moving through a nest of fiber-optic cables. If the power drops to zero, the emergency locks engage. We'll be trapped in a glass tomb. I have to bleed the system, make it think it's dying of natural causes. Muyol stood by the reinforced door, his eyes fixed on the hallway monitor. He watched his brother, Mujin, walking through the command center 3 floors above, sipping tea while he signed the orders for their execution. He's selling the ports, Muyol said, his voice a cold rasp. The trade routes, the shipping lanes, everything my father built. He's liquidating the family to pay for his seat at the table. Is that what you're worried about? Vera asked, not looking up as she stripped a wire with her teeth. The money. Muyol turned to her. The contrast was staggering, the man who owned the sky and the woman who lived in the dirt. I'm worried that I spent my life building a throne that was actually a cage for my daughter. I owe a debt, Vera, not to the syndicate, to her, and to you. Suddenly, the red alarm lights began to pulse. The bleeding was working, but Mujin's technicians were faster than expected. Intruder in Sector 4, the intercom shrieked. Lockdown initiated. Vera, they're coming, Muyol said, raising his pistol. The elevator is locked, we're pinned. Vera stood up, a heavy, jagged piece of the server, casing in her hand. She looked at the floor-to-ceiling glass window that overlooked the Seoul's skyline, 50 stories above the ground. In my world, Vera said, her eyes turning to cold flint, when a machine is too broken to fix, you scrap it. She handed Hana to Muyol. Hold her tight, don't look down. Vera, what are you? Vera didn't answer. She threw a heavy lead weight, a component she'd scavenged from the junkyard, at the corner of the reinforced glass. It didn't break, but it created a microfracture. Then, she jammed a pressurized canister of coolant into the crack and hit it with her wrench. The rapid temperature change did what no bullet could. The reinforced glass shattered into a million diamond-like shards, the high-altitude wind screaming into the room like a physical blow. "The window," Muyol yelled over the roar of the wind. "We're 50 stories up." "There's a window-washing platform 10 feet down," Vera shouted back, grabbing a coil of industrial climbing rope from her pack. "It's manual. It's mechanical. It's the only thing in this building your brother can't hack." She hooked the rope to a server rack and looked at Muyol. For a split second, the Mafia Boss saw the iron flower in full bloom, a woman who wasn't just surviving, but conquering. "If we die," Muyol said, looking at the abyss. "Then we die free," Vera replied. "Jump." The descent was a blur of steel and screaming wind. They hit the window-washing platform with a bone-jarring thud, the manual pulleys screeching as Vera fought the lever to slow their fall. They didn't head for the street. That was Mujin's territory. Instead, they hijacked a maintenance truck at the basement level, the engine roaring as Vera bypassed the ignition with a single flick of her pocket knife. "Where are we going?" Muyol shouted over the wind, shielding Hana as they sped through the neon-soaked streets. "We need to get to the docks. I have allies there." "Your allies are dead or bought," Vera narrated, her eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. 3 black SUVs were weaving through traffic behind them, their sirens a death knell. "We're going back to the only place where the ground belongs to me. We're going home." They crashed through the gates of the junkyard just as the rain turned into a deluge. The fortress of scrap was a graveyard of smoldering metal, the bus still smoking from the earlier breach. But as Mujin's elite tactical team swarmed the perimeter, Vera didn't look afraid. She looked like she was finally back in her office. "Muyol, take Hana into the engine pit," Vera commanded, tossing him a heavy-duty flashlight. "There's a manual override for the underground hydropress. When I give the signal, pull the red chain." "Vera, look at them," Muyol pointed at the SUVs. 30 men in full tactical gear were dismounting, armed with high-caliber rifles. "Ingenuity can't beat an army." "An army relies on technology," Vera said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. "I rely on gravity." She sprinted toward the center of the yard, climbing a rusted crane that towered over the scrap heaps. Below her, Mujin stepped out of the lead vehicle, his polished shoes splashing in the mud. He held a megaphone. "Vera, give me my niece and the man who used to be my brother," he laughed. "I'll give you $1 million and a ticket out of this country. Don't die for a man who doesn't even know your last name." Vera looked down at the gold coin in her hand, the one she had retrieved from the oil vat. She didn't say a word. She dropped the coin. It hit the ground with a soft clink. That was the signal. Vera slammed the crane's release. At the same moment, Muyol pulled the chain in the pit. The dead junkyard came to life one last time. The ground didn't just move, it collapsed. Vera had spent years undermining the soil beneath the main lot. As the hydraulics hissed, the 3 SUVs and 20 of Mujin's men slid helplessly into a deep, oil-slicked trench. Above them, Vera pulled the lever on the crane's electromagnet. 6 tons of crushed scrap metal, held in place by the crane's arm, were released all at once. It was a mechanical avalanche. The sound of crushing steel drowned out the screams. Mujin scrambled back, his face twisted in horror as his army was buried under the weight of the city's discarded history. He raised his gun toward the crane, but a shadow blocked his light. Muyol had emerged from the pit. He wasn't the boss anymore. He was a man covered in grease, holding a rusted iron pipe, standing beside the woman who had taught him how to fight in the dark. "The game is over, brother," Muyol said. The silence that followed the crash of metal was heavier than the storm. Mujin sat in the mud, his empire of glass and greed buried under 6 tons of rusted iron. He looked up at Vera, who was climbing down from the crane with the steady, rhythmic movements of a woman finishing a long day's work. She didn't look like a hero. She looked like a mechanic who had finally fixed a terminal engine. "You're a ghost," Mujin wheezed, staring at her. "You don't exist, people like you. You aren't supposed to win." Vera stopped a few feet from him, the rain washing the grease from her face but leaving the iron in her eyes. That's the mistake people like you always make, she narrated. You think the people who build your world are beneath you, but when the world falls apart, we're the only ones who know how to put the pieces back together. Muyol stepped forward, handing a shivering but safe Hana to Vera. He then turned to his brother. He didn't fire a shot. He simply handed Mujin the dragon-engraved gold coin, now scratched and worthless. The syndicate is gone, Mujin, Muyol said. The police are 5 minutes away. I've already leaked the server data Vera extracted. There's no throne left to sit on. 6 months later, the Palace of Thorns was under new management. But the real power wasn't in the skyscraper. It was in a newly renovated, state-of-the-art industrial complex on the edge of the city. Vera stood in the center of the massive workshop, wearing a clean, dark jumpsuit with the iron flower embroidered in gold on the chest. She was no longer homeless. She was the CEO of the world's most advanced tactical engineering firm and the primary security consultant for the reformed Kang Foundation. The door hissed open. Muyol walked in, no longer wearing the stiff, cold suits of a mafia don, but a simple black sweater. He looked younger, the hardness in his eyes replaced by a quiet, steady warmth. Hana is asking if you're coming to dinner, he said, leaning against a workbench covered in blueprints for a new clean energy engine. She says the wizard is late. Vera looked at him, a rare, genuine smile touching her lips. I told her I had to finish the stabilizers on the new transport. Physics doesn't wait for dinner, Muyol. He walked closer, his hand resting on the table near hers. This time, it wasn't for stability, but for connection. You saved my life, Vera, but you gave Hana a future. That's a debt I'll never be able to pay. You already paid it, Vera said, picking up her wrench. You stopped looking for a throne and started looking for a home. As the sun set over Seoul, the city glowed with a different light.